Everyone come into the space and we'll begin shortly.
Okay, good. I think we'll get going. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the Mindfulness of Travel as part of the Diversity Project's Mental Health Awareness Week events. I share the floor today with Dr. Stacey Graham. Stacey is a management consultant, executive coach, founder, speaker, writer, and right now she's also the Global Racial Equity Program Director at WPP. But most importantly, Stacey's also a really engaging meditation teacher, and she's trained in the Iyengar tradition of yoga. I'm Denisha Mendes. I'm head of RFP at Close Brothers Asset Management. I'm also an ambassador for the Diversity Project, and I'm also founder of Sunday Unplugged, a private wellbeing events business. I've also trained in yoga and mindfulness. I trained in the Shivananda tradition, and I focus on restorative yoga. So, like most of you, I have a whole bunch of passions outside of work, and the real me is really that I'm a traveler and an explorer. I've visited 96 countries on 6 continents and devoted my entire life to the art of travel and exploration. So we're in for a huge treat today because Stacey's going to guide us to through a meditation. But before we do that, I'm here to tell you a story. And that story is that one sunny Tuesday afternoon in October, this is back in 2014, I did one of the craziest things of my life. I walked into a travel agency in West London and I blew £10,000 on 21 flights. 10 days later, I boarded a plane to Australia and I told my friends just before I took off that I'd be back in 5 months, which actually I knew was a lie. I didn't come back for about 2 years. So there's a lot of people who want to go off and do a trip around the world. And 10K was not an easy amount of money for me to spend. I'm not a big hedge fund manager who just kind of easily makes money. And over the next 2 years, I ended up spending my entire housing deposit, so all the savings I had on travel. And today I'm here to tell you why I did that. And I wanted to explain why travel healed me, and most importantly, how travel led me to a lifetime practice of mindfulness. So the day I decided to go off and do that was a Tuesday. And I know this because I was at work. In fact, I was called into a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning where my then boss and HR manager, who I wasn't expecting to be in that meeting, were present. And they said, listen, we're restructuring the company and we'd like to offer you this redundancy payout. Now, I knew without a shadow of a doubt in my mind that for the first time in my entire life, the stars had aligned. This was a now or never moment. I hated my job, and actually, I hated my life as well. I'd been living in a beautiful flat in Kensington. I had completed a master's degree. I had a big circle of friends and I threw fabulous parties. But deep down inside, something in my soul was really lonely. And I couldn't quite work out what to do. Now, the other thing that had happened in the 4 years before this, that I'd been very sick. I'd been diagnosed with 6 different conditions. And all the doctors, I worked with 9 doctors, said that my conditions were psychosomatic, or rather that they were related to stress. A turning point for me a few months before that Tuesday was that I'd been sitting in a nice posh office with a gynecologist who said that I had stopped ovulating so that I wasn't physically able to have children because my body had become so stressed with what had happened. What had happened? How did I get here? How had I become so stressed? My early life had been very privileged. I'd had a very comfortable upbringing. But in my 20s, in my early 20s, my dad lost his business and the family went bankrupt. And we were propelled almost overnight into absolute extreme poverty. The 4 of us, my mother, my father, and my sister and I, moved into one room and we lived in a studio flat. for 4 years. This meant that age 25, I became a breadwinner for the entire family. 75% of my net paycheck at 25, and I don't know what you were making at 25, but that's not a lot of money. 75% of my paycheck went on supporting the family. I'd never experienced financial struggle in that scope, and I really hope that I never do again. But it also meant that in the days before paycheck and so on, I often had to decide between my travel card or my lunch. Things were really, really tough. My parents also became really, really sick. My mum nearly died of a heart attack. She needed a quadruple bypass and took a very long time to recover after complications. She had to be resuscitated. My dad fell into depression and he was suicidal for quite a long time. This is quite a lot to deal with in your 20s. And for a young professional, early careers, in a stressful job at an investment firm, this really was quite a lot to deal with. So now the years were passing and we were all sleeping in that one room. And the strain of all this started adding up. I had chronic back pain, I had an eating disorder, I had PMDD, and I had complex PTSD. As I said, I was going from doctor to doctor. And the thing that all these doctors kept telling me was, you've got to reduce the stress in your life, or you need to go on antidepressants. Now, here I was now in my early 30s as a shell of a woman, and I didn't want to go on antidepressants. There's nothing wrong with people going on antidepressants. This is not a lecture about that, and there's zero stigma about that. It's absolutely okay if people are on antidepressants. But I didn't want to do that because I knew that there had to be another way out. So I started a secret spreadsheet. And in that secret spreadsheet, over many, many months, I wrote out all the dreams that I had, every country that I ever wanted to see, everything I dreamt of as a little girl. I put it into this spreadsheet and I kept it on my work computer. And every day at lunch, I would log onto my secret spreadsheet and I'd fiddle around with it and I'd add something else that I wanted to do. I wanted to see mountains in Africa. There were things I wanted to see in South America. I wrote it all into this massive, massive spreadsheet. But ultimately, this became about holding a vision. And it became about holding a vision that was deep inside my heart. So now, the years have passed. It's that Tuesday morning. My parents had now become old enough to get a pension, so I was no longer supporting them. And this HR manager was handing me a piece of paper with a big amount of money on it. Now, I actually didn't need that amount of money. I'd managed to save it up by now. But now I knew that I was really free. I was safer. So I went back up to my desk, I emailed myself that secret spreadsheet, and I walked out of the building. Now, as some of you might have experienced through redundancies, you're supposed to come back and do consultation, whatever. But I knew that I would never do that. And actually, I ended up signing my payout, my papers from a little beach hut in Fiji several months later. It was one of the most empowering things I did that day. I walked out of the office and I walked out of my life, actually. I often describe it to people as pulling the plug on my entire life. So over the next few months, of years actually, I started in Australia, then I went to New Zealand, Fiji, and then Vanuatu. I traveled 12,000 kilometers through Africa overland. I started in South Africa, through Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and Rwanda. After that, I spent a year crossing the length of the Andes mountain range, all the way from Mexico through Central America, where I went through Belize, Honduras, and Guatemala. And then I hopped over to Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. I saw things here that I didn't know existed, and I felt things that I didn't know I needed to feel. I found myself standing on the desert dunes of the Namibian desert at sunrise. I was dancing with locals in Kenya and felt the rhythm of Africa under my feet. I cycled through Mount Cook National Park in New Zealand, and I was breathing the freshest air you could ever breathe up in the highest mountains of the Himalayas. I was swimming in the translucent turquoise waters of the Caribbean, and suddenly sitting with gorillas in Rwanda, crying at the sheer beauty of seeing their family bonds. I was diving the Great Barrier Reef, collecting seashells, meeting tribes people and shamans in Amazonian rainforests. But most importantly, I was spending many, many months just lying under the stars, especially in the Andes of South America, and just looking at the Milky Way. I also tried a whole bunch of radical things like flying planes and jumping out of planes. And it became an exercise of collecting lots of photographs. I was posting a lot of this stuff on social media. But after a while, I realized that something was missing. I thought all those things would make me happy. And you know what? The truth is those things did make me happy, and they will make a lot of people really happy. But it was temporary. And it was a little bit like getting drunk. You sort of have a glass of wine, or you might even have a whole bottle. And that's how I felt for the first year of my trip. I was swirling in this kind of stupor of joy. But after a while, you see, you find yourself standing on these big tourist sites. In my case, it was Machu Picchu. And you're looking at this wonder of the ancient world and this UNESCO World Heritage Site. And you're taking the perfect selfie for your social media account. But then you see the busload of tourists. So I kind of felt that I was buying myself experiences. And I noticed that tourism was a lot about acquiring things and collecting things. But real travel is about inquiring, it's looking for things. So after about a year, I wanted to really find out what exploration and adventure really was. I could still hear something inside of me. It was like music. It was like a song that was really, really quiet. I could barely hear it, but I knew it was inside of me. And I needed to find a way to sort of turn up the volume. I really wanted to hear myself. I knew I had to go home at some point, and I didn't want to just go back with a bunch of pictures. And you know what? After all these countries, 96 countries now, I've learned that you don't know when you get your lesson. At some point, something will hit you like a train. And in my case, my big lesson came in a very boring mountain town in Peru. It was a very rainy day, and it's a place called Huaraz, which is a few hours north of Lima, the capital of Peru. And that's where everyone goes for the hiking, if you want to go do really good trekking in Peru. I was up very early because of the time difference. I'd actually flown back from London on that flight. And I was sleeping in a very simple guest house. So if you're a backpacker, you don't always get breakfast served. You have to go out and find breakfast. So as you know, you might know this from your own experiences of travel, that you're sort of in a rhythm. You know, you kind of wake up in London, don't you? And you jump on a train and there's a bus that arrives on time. And then you go somewhere and someone will just make you a cup of coffee in 90 seconds. And that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted a cup of coffee. So I'm roaming around this little mountain town in Peru. It's 7 o'clock in the morning and the sky was completely overcast. It was this familiar, miserable gray of the English skies. And I was quite grumpy, actually. The weather forecast for the next few days was miserable, which meant that I knew I was kind of stuck. I'd come all this way and now I was sort of stuck waiting for good weather. All I wanted was a coffee. And I didn't understand why no one had a takeaway coffee for me at 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, here's something else I learned. A lot of places in the world don't have takeaway coffees because people sit down at home and have the time to make themselves a cup, and they have a ritual. They take the time to go off and do that. Anyway, so I'm stumping around this town square, and out of nowhere, I suddenly see this woman. And it is now 7 years later, and I think about this woman and I talk about this woman every single week. There's a certain magic about travel because you don't know when something will happen that will change you, and you have no idea what that will be. Travel is not so much about movement. Travel is about being moved. It's about being shifted. It's about having the tectonic plates inside of you radically change. Something changes dramatically. You're changed in a way which means that you will never be the same person that you were before. And this is what just happened to me in this little town square in Peru. I see this woman who was very, very old. She looked like she was about 80 years old. And on her back, she was carrying a traditional hand-woven textile, this cloth, this massive cloth. And it looked like she was carrying a human being on her back. It was tied here around her neck. I was completely perplexed. I'd never seen a woman of such age carrying such load, and it completely froze me in my tracks. I thought of my grandmother and I thought of my mum, and I was just really, really confused. I then watched her untie this cloth, and she opened it on the floor of this town square, and in it was a load of dirty, muddy potatoes. Now, in this microsecond, I realized that this woman had lived a life that had nothing to do with the privilege that I had had. My education, my career, all the things that had happened to me in my life at that point. As a young girl, I'd been sexually abused. I was a very depressed teenager. I had to pay out my family through this bankruptcy and experience this broken financial hardship. But I was still very, very privileged. And I was way more privileged than this 80-year-old woman. She had cracks all around her eyes. Her skin was completely broken, and her hands were so worn that the skin had completely dried out. I remember to this day, this is 7 years later, I remember how long and dirty her nails were. She looked dirty and she looked tired. She was worn from the hardship of life. Now, she was out there that morning working with that sack of potatoes. She was fighting for her survival with that load on her back. And I began wondering where she'd come from. She must have come on a bus. She must have carried all those potatoes, and it looked like she'd actually harvested them herself. So that moment changed me, because that job I hated in asset management started looking not so bad. Actually, it started looking really good. And I also realized that there was a very low chance that I would end up lugging potatoes in my 80s. And actually, there was a low chance that my mother and my grandmother would end up working for $2 a day. So from that moment on, my travel began shifting towards people and not places. And I started focusing on stories and conversations. So I started speaking to women who sold their bodies for sex. I started speaking to children who had been orphaned and who were living in poverty. I met men who told me that they'd never had a chance to go to school because they'd started working age 10 as delivery boys in the local market. So I met people who'd gone through wars and famines, people who'd lost their parents, who'd lost their childhood, who'd been raped. And the more I observed people's lives and livelihoods, the deeper I began to travel. And the more each day began to feel like 1,000 hours. So there was a massive shift. I began experiencing an unvarnished reality. And this is really what travel is about. It's about seeing things as they are. Now, I've seen things on the news and in documentaries, but I realized this was very different when you're actually in conversation with those people in front of you. So it's a little bit like watching a gig online and enjoying the music, or being in the live concert. If you're in the gig, you'll never forget how the music felt on your skin and how it felt being surrounded by all those people. So anyway, here I started seeing the transformative power of travel, and I started seeing travel as a spiritual practice and as a creative practice. I decided that travel was now my art form, and that each and every day that I was on the road, each day that I was homeless by choice, I could create a world that I did want to live in. This meant that each new encounter had the ability to transform me, and all I had to do was to put myself into situations where I could learn something. I believed that this was a time to be bewildered, mystified, and moved. And I wanted to go off and find a door to the real adventure, to the real world. And this is actually really difficult. So if you want to be a real explorer in whatever, now most places in the world have been explored. There's a lot of people before us who've trodden these paths. But it became really, really clear that the solution was very simple. The most radical thing to do, the wildest adventure you can have, is actually to go into yourself. And the biggest luxury is to have the space and the time to do that. So it's not sitting in a first class seat or in a fancy hotel. It's having space to go into yourself. So for the last leg of my travel, I've now gone through Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific Islands. I'd crossed Africa and the Andes. I decided to go to India. And here I decided I wanted to go and study meditation. I went into a Buddhist monastery and I began living a monastic life for 2 months. And this was actually one of the most radical things I've ever done, because when you're away from your responsibilities, when you're away from your bonds, your stories and the narratives that define who you are at home, you experience an ultimate freedom, but it's quite difficult to sit still. It's quite a radical thing to do because you don't really know what's going to happen. And ultimately, it takes courage to put your world on hold. It takes courage to sit in silence. You're out there, you're deciphering new things, you're looking at who you are in response to all that. But the high form of travel, a master of travel, the people that I really, really admire are the people that understand that travel is about sitting still. So anyway, here I am now in India at this monastery. And one of the key things that took me a while to understand that there was a difference between meditation and mindfulness. So meditation, which is what I was doing there most of the time, and I had the luxury to do, is when you're sitting in a seated practice. So you're sitting on a chair, on a cushion, cross-legged, and you're focusing on opening your heart, expanding your awareness, calming your mind, experiencing inner peace, and the list goes on. But mindfulness is something else. Mindfulness is a simple act of peace. You're paying attention and noticing and being present in whatever you're doing. And that you can do at home, that you can do at work, and that you can do in a pandemic. So I discovered quite a few things in that 2-year period, but the biggest discoveries I'd found were when I sat still and I was going nowhere. I took the time to travel into myself, and I found something real. Now, I know that this comes from a place of privilege. It's easy to say that when you have seen as much as I've seen, but it's still the truth. And I know you all want a holiday. I want a holiday too. But what is happening right now, the fact that we're not traveling, the fact that we're forced to sit still, the country's opening up slowly, is very radical, and it's very, very valuable. Real travel is not about movement. It's about being moved. And being moved usually requires you to open your heart and your minds to something unknown. Having the luxury of space to hold a bit of stillness is a very, very, very powerful thing. And I do invite you to explore this. Now, it's taken me some time, but over the years, I met lots and lots of interesting people. And I found that something that travelers really had in common was a certain mindset. So some of those things are that, firstly, travelers understand that the highest form of spirituality is human connection, that our relationships are the most important investment that you can make. The other thing travelers do is that they don't define success by what's in your bank account. Success is defined by how much we can give to others, the stories we can tell, the time we can give, the skills we can share. Travelers also don't see daily life and travel as separate realities. They're all part of the same thing. You can approach each task in your day with the openness and curiosity and the same sense of adventure when you get to the airport. Now, I know it's not the same, but when you think of each contact and each event in your day as part of the big picture and the journey, it's actually a really, really wonderful thing. So when you're there logging into the next WebEx and the next Zoom thing, but you approach it as a journey and a curiosity, and you go, well, let's see what happens now. It will free you, and it does help. Travelers also build pockets of stillness into our lives, and this too can be very difficult. I'm a family person myself. I struggle to find stillness, but sometimes it just means I have to get up earlier, or sometimes, like yesterday, it means I'm just going to sit in the car for 5 minutes and not go back into the house, but just give myself a bit of space. Travelers understand that anything worthwhile takes a really, really long time. So I invite you to start a secret spreadsheet or build a vision board or whatever it is that you need to do to connect to your dreams. We also have a habit to ask for a map when you arrive at a destination. So whenever you find yourself in a situation that's unfamiliar to you, that's uncharted territory, it's okay to ask for help. And real travelers, they do this other thing. They give themselves permission to get lost every single day, and they seek out things that magnify your spirit. So I hope some of these things have been useful to you. I hope you heard something today that moved you. I enjoyed traveling with you. Thank you very much for listening to me. And it is my absolute great pleasure to hand over to Stacey now, who will lead us through a meditation.
Thank you, Denisha. That was, I really enjoyed just sitting and listening and taking that in. And thank you to all of you who have joined us this afternoon for this session. I would invite you, if you are near your computer or laptop, to put into the chat box just, what's coming up for you right now. How are you feeling? Just a word or phrase. If you feel comfortable doing that, you can put it into the chat box. We will see it. And now it's time to transition. And I know that often when we think about meditation or mindfulness, we often have an image of sitting in perfect stillness, maybe cross-legged. So instead, if you're physically able to do that, I'd invite you to come into a standing position. You can stand. We won't stand for the whole 30 minutes, promise, but come into a standing position. You can stand next to a wall if that's helpful for you. Seeing some comments coming in, thank you. One person has input inspired is what's coming up for them. Another person put quite emotional after that talk and inspired. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so maybe some of you, even if you've not put that into the chat box, maybe there are emotions coming up. And what we want to practice now is how we can be with those emotions as they arise, how we can observe them without becoming them, if you will. So coming into a standing position, you can stand next to a wall, you can stand in the middle of your space, whatever feels comfortable for you. And I invite you to ground through your feet if you are standing, and if you are remaining seated, grounding in a way that you're recognizing where you're connecting with the floor or with the ground. I have a bit of noise in the background with the kids coming home from school, so I may mute from time to time between the longer pauses, but I'm still here with you. So I invite you, before you do anything else, to just look around your space. In this moment, with the eyes, with the gaze of the moment, just noticing first if there's anything out of place that you'd like to have change that might disturb you or disturb the energy of your space, but really looking, making sure you look into the different corners. And once you know that everything is as it should be, allow yourself to settle into your position. If you're standing, ensure that the feet are well connected, that you're not allowing the weight to be too far back or too far forward, that you continue to find a balance. And when we stand specifically, we're never still. So allowing that natural movement in standing without trying to force or harden. And if you're still sitting, similarly, notice if one side of the body is feeling or moving differently or engaged differently than the other side without trying to change it, simply tuning in to those differences. I invite you here to begin to tune into your breath, if your breath is available to you at this time. Tuning into the breath means observing the breath without trying to control its depth or rhythm. If you have a blocked nose or finding it difficult to tune into your breath, simply come back again to where you're connecting to the ground and bring your awareness there. As you observe the breath, notice, where does it begin in the body? Notice if it's a bit lighter or a bit deeper. Observe how perhaps your clothes move with the breath, or different parts of your body, the sensations stand out to you as you breathe. If you are standing, I invite you to now come into a comfortable seated position. Whatever that means for you, whether it's on the floor, in a chair, on your couch. If you are seated on a chair or a couch, I invite you to bring both of your feet to the floor. Finding a comfortable seated position that you can maintain for the next several minutes. As you find this new position, bring your awareness back to your breath and notice what may have changed. Picking up on a word Denisha used, inquiry. Our journey in this session is a type of inquiry. I invite you to bring your awareness to your feet, to your toes, the balls of your feet, the heels of your feet. the arches of your feet. Without trying too hard or forcing, can you observe the sensations arising in this moment in your feet? Traveling up, I invite you to feel into your ankles, your calves, your lower legs. What sensations can you feel into? It can be anything. Perhaps you feel the fabric of your clothes against your legs. Maybe they're cold, maybe they're warm, maybe they're just right. Maybe there's a prickle or the itch that only comes up when you decide to sit still. Now allowing your attention to journey further to your knees. Depending on how you're sitting, you might find it easier to tune into the sensations of the knees. But take into consideration the backs of the knees, the fronts of the knees, the sides. If at any time you find it difficult to tune into sensations or you find yourself frustrated, simply bring your awareness back to your grounding, perhaps your seat connecting to your body or your feet connecting to the floor. Allowing your awareness to rise a bit further to your thighs, the fronts and the backs of the thighs, where the thighs connect to the hips. What sensations are you observing? journeying a little further. Observe the sensations moving through your lower abdomen, your stomach, your chest. We'll rest here a little longer just because for many people, there's often a lot of action here and a good opportunity to observe without disturbing. Perhaps you are observing your heartbeat or a pulse in the lower abdomen, or the course of your breath, starting in the lower abdomen and moving its way up your chest. Can continue to observe here just a bit longer. Now allowing your awareness to move from your fingertips through your forearms, your elbows, your upper arms, and your shoulders. I have a mindfulness teacher who always says, no one has any sensations that they can feel in their elbows. As a yoga teacher, I beg to differ. Allow your awareness to travel back and forth from the fingertips up to the shoulders and back down. Allowing your awareness to rise a bit further into a smaller area, your throat, the back of your neck, the base of your skull. What can you observe here? And just a reminder, if at any time you feel frustrated or feel like it's becoming difficult to tune into a particular part, bring your awareness back into your grounding position, where you're connecting to your seat or to the floor or to the ground. And then bringing your awareness to the back of the head, the crown of the head, the front of the face. Can you feel the skin at the crease of the ear? Can you observe if you're clenching your molars? Or perhaps you can feel the breath at the tip of your nose. Or your pulse at your temples. Now allowing your awareness to flow throughout the body, trying to continue the movement without getting stuck at any particular part. Keeping in mind that sound too is a sensation. Feeling the air touching your skin. Allow your awareness to move throughout the body for the next few breaths. And in your own time, allowing your awareness to come to your heart center, the middle of your chest. Noticing how it rises and falls with your breath, perhaps even feeling into your heartbeat. You're welcome to place one hand or two hands on the chest, but you don't have to, if that would help. Allow the breath to flow naturally here as you pause your awareness at your heart center. Connecting to the crown of the head and feeling that connection between the heart center in the crown of your head. It might be through the breath. It might be through visualizing a light spiraling between the two areas. Connecting the heart center to the crown of the head. Opening to each moment again and again. And then letting go of that visualization. Lifting the shoulders if they caved in a little bit, lifting up, opening the chest. Here for our final few moments. Observe any shifts in energy, in mood, in presence. Allow the breath to deepen. And at your own pace, bringing your awareness back into this space. And again, I invite you to put into the chat, if you'd like, words that may be coming up for you now, how you're feeling, how you were feeling, how you are feeling, anything you'd like to share.
Thank you, Stacey. Gosh, I feel like I've gone to another planet. Long day at work. That was a really, really wonderful session. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're nearly out of time here. Oh, very relaxed. There's thank yous coming through. So thank you so much for everyone who joined our session. It was such a privilege to be here with you. We've got 2 more events as part of Mental Health Awareness Week. We've turned it into a month. Next week, Ju and I are doing a workshop at the same time, same place on trauma and grief. And then Stacey's coming back on the Wednesday after that. We're doing a session on new beginnings. So that should be really, really exciting as well. We really hope you can join us then. Have a lovely, lovely rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.